All right, for those of you just joining us for Tuesday, the 24th, we just watched one of the videos, the video introducing economics, and now we're starting into chapter 2. So, how does economic conditions affect business? Well, there's a few different ways. Businesses succeed in the U.S. due partly to the free economic and the social climate. The fact that we have a free market system means a lot. It really honestly does. Changes in the U.S. economic and political system influence business success. So, because we have a free market system, and we're not going to get too deep in this because we could talk about this for days, the economy will fluctuate. It will go up and down. And as it goes up and down, it's going to affect your business. There are a lot of other factors economic factors that affect business too. And we'll touch on some of them today. But yeah, that's a big part of it. Global economics and global politics also influence business in the U.S., what we get done and what we don't get done. You talk about GDP in the video. GDP is gross domestic product. We used to measure our output, our economic. GDP measures the economic output for the entire country. We used to measure it using what was called gross national product. I'm not going to get into what the differences are because they're not all that big, to be honest with you. The way we measured our imports and exports, and the way we measured what companies that were U.S. companies were doing business overseas, the way we measured their input was part of the change. But your GDP, it can be influenced by productivity in the nation's workforce. So the more they're putting out, the more they're producing, the higher GDP is going to be. It can also be impacted by misfortunes in U.S. companies. When this company was forced to stop production of 737 airliners, the company, as well as their suppliers and the airlines that fly their planes, saw their growth severely impacted. Anyone know what company that was? Who made the 737? And they discontinued it.
I think it was Boeing.
It was Boeing, correct. It was Boeing, very good. And it hurt. When they discontinued it, it hurt the airlines, and it had an effect, I should say, on the airlines and on other stakeholders, people that in their area that depended on them. So, like they talked about in the video, economics is a study of how a society chooses to employ its resources to produce goods and services, and how they're going to distribute them for consumption. We choose to let private businesses make them and let private businesses distribute them, and to make money that way, and that builds money in our economy. Not every nation does that. Some nations control the whole process themselves. We don't do that here in the U.S. Macroeconomics is the larger global and even national picture of economics. It's looking at the entire nation's economy or the entire world's economy as a whole. Microeconomics, that's the part that looks at the smaller behaviors, the behaviors of people and the behaviors of organizations. You're going to hear those two terms a lot if you read or you talk about economics. And there's an example the author gives about economic contrast. The economic contrast show here is remarkable. Business is booming in Seoul, Korea, as shown in the photo on the right, but North Korea struggles. They're not doing well economically. They struggle hard to, and you also have to ask how much they really care, but they struggle hard to feed their people and educate their people and that sort of thing. And the author asks, what do you think accounts for the dramatic differences in the economies? Well, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? South Korea has a free market open system. North Korea has a closed system that is controlled by the government. They control the means of production. That's socialism. And we'll get into that on Thursday. Socialism and actual communism, at least what Marx said was communism. A lot of what, and we'll talk about this on Thursday, but a lot of what we talked about in the old days during the Cold War and all that, what we call communism was a political thing. It wasn't an economic thing. The argument is communism has never really existed. We never actually seen it. We've seen different forms of socialism. But however, socialism, and when we get into it, we're going to talk about the economic difference, but it's when the government controls everything. In open systems, the government may have regulation. They regulate to a certain point, but the market is allowed to be free. It's allowed to go. So, a big part of economics is resource development. The study of how to increase resources and to create conditions that will make better use of these resources. So you're looking at how to use the resources inside of your country. And it's like in the video, the Eisenhower part, where he was talking about the military spending takes away from other parts of the economy. It does. Any kind of spending we do is taking away from somewhere else. So you have to figure out what your balance is going to be. Examples of way to increase resources, new energy sources, new ways of growing foods, which we work on all the time in the US, and new ways of creating goods and services, and he gives you some examples there. Nanotechnology, 3D printing, and 4D technology. I have a friend who's very big into 3D printing. He actually made himself an Iron Man suit, and it's amazing. It looks like something out of a Marvel movie when he puts it on. It's just amazing what you can do with these things. So we're going to get rid of that video, and we're going to share another video. That's not quite as long and not quite as perky. I like that couple, but they're kind of perky. I had video there. That's a mistake. We're not doing video. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue. All right, hold on. There it is. All right. All right. I think I actually intended, I decided to open that video. I think I was going to actually originally put it there, but I decided to open with it. Okay. The secret to creating wealth in an economy. Thomas Malthus was one of your older beginning economic scientists, and he believed that if the rich have most of the wealth, that the poor have most of the population, resources would run out. People would starve. He called it the dismal science, the study of economics. Latest world statistics show the population growing more slowly than expected. Honestly, we're not growing as quick as we were, 30 years ago. Contrary to Malthus, what he thinks or thought, some macroeconomists believe that a large population can be a resource. An educated population is highly valuable, and business owners provide jobs and economic growth for their employees and communities. So, there's a value to having a lot of people. People are a huge resource. All right. So, not everyone agreed with what Malthus said. He was kind of a pessimist, to be honest with you, if you read his stuff. Basically, the rich are going to devour everything and the poor are going to starve. Well, I guess that could happen, but in reality, it's not a big thing. Here in the US, all right, Adam Smith is where it all began for us. The founding fathers were very into Adam Smith and very into the creation of wealth. And they built our economic structure based on, and even part of our Constitution based on what Smith believed. Freedom was vital to any economy's survival. You had to have freedom. Think of the situation they were in when they went into when they started the Revolutionary War. They were ruled by a king. When you're ruled by a king, you don't have freedom. You pretty much do whatever the king dictates you have to do. They wanted to get out of that. They wanted to build an economy. They had this land. It was a lot bigger than they realized it was at the time. And they wanted to create their own wealth. Adam Smith also said freedom to own land and property, and the right to keep profits from a business is essential. The problem with kingdoms is, especially in the older days, is that the king could come in at any time and take away what you have because he's the king and he owns everything. So there wasn't a lot of incentive under kingdoms for the economy to prosper, because say you wanted to build an apple orchard and you build this, beautiful 1,000-acre apple orchard, and it's making all these apples and you're making all this money selling apples. The risk of doing it was too high. Why? Because the king would see you're making money off of this. And instead of just taxing you like the government would do, the king could come in and actually take your business away from you. The king could step in and say, hey, this is my apple orchard now, and leave you in the poorhouse. This is what they were trying to avoid. And this is what Adam Smith was working against at the time when he wrote this. People will work hard if they believe they will be rewarded. A very theory Y thing, which we'll get into theory X and theory Y in further chapters. But this is what Smith was preaching at the time, and our founding fathers really jumped into it. How businesses benefit the community? Well, according to Smith, the invisible hand. That's a process that turns self-educated gain into social and economic benefits. As people improve their social situation in life, they help the economy prosper through the production of goods and services and ideas and charitable donations. So if you give people an opportunity to thrive, they're going to put back into the economy. That's the whole idea behind the free market system. They help the economy prosper through the production of goods, through providing services. They come up with ideas. They give money to charity. However, even though we have all this, our poverty rate in the US is pretty high. Compared to other countries, it's fairly high, which is sad, but it's part of what we need to work on in this country. Something that I have a very personal thing about that I like to work on. All right. We're going to share a video again. A little video about Adam Smith and all of his theories and everything. His theory. And economic theory.
Adam Smith is our guide to perhaps the most pressing dilemma of our time: how to make a capitalist economy more humane and more meaningful. He was born in Scotland in Kirkcaldy, a small manufacturing town near Edinburgh, in 1723. He was a hard-working student and very close to his mother. He then became an academic philosopher, wrote a major book about the importance of sympathy, and lectured on logic and aesthetics. He was also one of the greatest thinkers in the history of economics, in part because his concerns went far beyond the economic. He wanted to understand the money system because his underlying ambition was to make nations and people happier. Smith remains an invaluable guide to 4 ideas. When one considers the modern world of work, 2 facts stand out. Modern economies produce unprecedented amounts of wealth, and many ordinary people find work rather boring and, a key complaint, meaningless. The 2 phenomena are in fact intimately related, as Adam Smith was the first to understand through his theory of specialization. He observed that in modern businesses, tasks formerly done by one person in a single day could far more profitably be split into many tasks carried out by multiple people over whole careers. Smith hailed this as a momentous development. He predicted that national economies would become hugely richer the more specialized their workforces became. One sign our world is now so rich, Smith could tell us, is that every time we meet a stranger at a party, we're unlikely to understand what they do. The mania for incomprehensible job titles like logistics supply manager, packaging coordinator, or communications and learning officer prove the economic logic of Smith's insight. But there is one special problem with specialization: meaning. When businesses are small and their processes contained, a sense of helping others is readily available. But when everything is industrialized, one ends up as a tiny cog in a gigantic machine whose overall logic is liable to be absent from the minds of people lower down in the organization. A company with 150,000 employees distributed across 4 continents, making things that take 5 years from conception to delivery, will struggle to maintain any sense of purpose or cohesion. So Smith discerned that bosses of the specialized corporations of modernity have an extra responsibility to their workers, to remind them of their purpose, role, and ultimate dignity of their labor. Smith's age saw the development of what we'd now call consumer capitalism. Manufacturers began turning out luxury goods for a broadening middle class. Some commentators were appalled. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau wished to ban luxury from his native Geneva. He was a particular fan of ancient Sparta and argued that his city should copy its austere martial lifestyle. Disagreeing violently, Smith pointed out to the Swiss philosopher that luxury consumerism in fact had a very serious role to play in a good society. It generated the surplus wealth that allowed societies to look after their weakest members. Consumer societies, despite their frivolity, didn't let young children and the old starve, for they could afford hospitals and poor relief. So Smith defended consumer capitalism on the basis that it did more good for the poor than societies devoted to high ideals. That said, Smith held out some fascinating hopes for the future of capitalism. He didn't want it to stay stuck at the frivolous level forever. He observed that humans have many higher needs that currently lie outside of capitalist enterprise. Among them our need for emotional education, for self-understanding, for beautiful cities, and for rewarding social lives. The hope for the future is that we'll learn to generate sizable profits from helping people in truly important, ambitious ways. Properly developed, capitalism shouldn't just service our basic material needs while exciting us to buy frivolous things. It should make money from goods and services that deliver true fulfillment. Then, as now, the great question was how to get the rich to behave well towards the rest of society. The Christian answer to this was, make them feel guilty. Meanwhile, the radical left-wing answer was, then and now, raise taxes. But Smith disagreed with both approaches. The hearts of the rich were likely to remain cold, and high taxes would simply lead the rich to flee the country. He proposed that, contrary to what one might expect, it isn't money that the rich really care about. It's honor and respect. The rich accumulate money not because they're materially greedy, but primarily in order to be liked and approved of. So rather than taxing the rich, governments should understand the vanity at the heart of the rich and their motivations. They should therefore give the rich plenty of honors and status in return for doing all the good things that these narcissists wouldn't normally bother with, like funding schools and hospitals and paying their workers well. As Smith put it, the great secret of education is to direct vanity to proper objects. Big corporations feel very evil to us now, the natural targets of blame for low-paying jobs, environmental abuse and sickening ingredients. But Adam Smith knew that there was an unexpected and more important element responsible for these ills: our taste. It's not companies that primarily degrade the world, it's our appetites, which they merely serve. As a result, the reform of capitalism hinges on an odd-sounding but critical task: the education of the consumer. We need to be taught to want better quality things and pay a proper price for them, one that reflects the true burden on workers and the environment. A good capitalist society doesn't just offer customers choice, it also teaches people to exercise this choice in judicious ways. Capitalism can, Smith suggests, be saved by elevating the quality of consumer demand. The economic state of the world can seem at once so wrong and yet so complicated, we end up collapsing into despair and passivity. Adam Smith is on hand to lend us confidence and hope. His work is full of ideas about how human values can be reconciled with the needs of businesses. He deserves our ongoing attention because he was interested in an issue that has become a leading priority of our own times: how to create an economy that is at once profitable and civilized.
When you think about the time period Smith came from, that's all pretty amazing. I mean, the industrial age was in its infancy. What he called mass production was nothing compared to mass production we see today, or that they saw 100 years after him. Yet he saw where the evils could be. He saw how it could be done differently. He was way ahead of his time, which is why our founding fathers here in the U.S. fell in love with him. All right, guys. It's 1:25. Let's take 10 minutes, come back at 1:35, and we'll finish up for the day. All right? All right. See you then. All right, class. Let's get back into it again. What do you think? Get this party started. Nope, you want chapter 2. Thank you. All right, so we were talking about Adam Smith, and a little more, just real quick about him. According to his theory, and he talked about this in the video, business owners are motivated to work hard because they know what they'll earn, and they get to keep the rewards of their labor. When they prosper, his idea was when they prosper, other people in the economy prospers. He said, they say here, when they prosper, as the owner of this restaurant has, they're able to add employees and grow. So they're actually putting money into the economy as they grow. The economy gets better. People have jobs. People can get better housing, and they can educate their kids and that sort of thing. It indirectly helps the community, and it helps the economy to grow. And then he asked, what might motivate you to start your own business? Well, a lot of things motivate people to start their own business. The fact that there is an opportunity there to build wealth and to live a good life is probably the main thing that motivates everybody to have a good business. So what we got over so far, what is the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics? Well, macroeconomics looks at the whole economy, like the entire nation or the entire globe. Microeconomics looks a little more smaller: people, organizations, business, or specific products or services. That's the difference. What is better for an economy than teaching a man to fish? I like this. I always love the Chinese saying, you can give a man a fish, you feed him for the day. You teach him how to fish, you feed him for the rest of his life. But in economics, if you want to create wealth, teach the man how to start his own fish farm. All right, have his own business. Then you really create wealth. That's the whole economic approach to that. And what does Adam Smith's term, the invisible hand, mean? Well, the invisible hand, it's a term by Adam Smith. It describes a process that turns self-directed gains into social and economic benefits. In other words, what Adam Smith was saying, the invisible hand is, yes, I'm making money for me, but while I'm doing that, I'm creating jobs and I'm providing products or services for the society, and I'm benefiting the society as a whole. To become wealthy, people working in their own self-interest produce goods, and they produce services that expands hiring. As they grow, more people get hired and more people benefit. That was Smith's whole idea behind that part of his economic theory. So as we get out of talking to Smith, but when we talk about Smith, we talk about capitalism. Capitalism, an economic system in which all or most of the production and distribution are privately owned and operated for profit. The US, England, Australia, Canada, most of your European countries have these kinds of systems. I want you to note something in there. It says factors of production and distribution are privately owned and operated for profit, but it says most of them are. There's a reason for that. There are some businesses that capitalist countries will heavily regulate because they are what we call natural monopolies. We'll get into monopolies later on. Actually, on Thursday, we'll get into monopolies. But they're natural monopolies. Utilities are a prime example, right? A community is only going to have one electric company. A community is only going to have one water company. Now, that electric company may have a little bit of competition or create a little competition because they may be buying power from different sources. However, you're only going to have one. We'll get into a lot of this on Thursday because I have a lot of strong feelings about that. But that's capitalism in a basic. That's what we need. State capitalism is a combination of freer markets with some government control. You have to have some government control. China has experienced rapid growth using state capitalism. They have. They've also maintained a lot of control. You have to have a certain amount of regulation control, and we'll get into that down the road. But think about what driving would be like if you didn't have traffic laws. Think about how eating out or buying food from grocery stores would be if you didn't have laws that regulated the sanitation and health levels of food that are sold. So you have to have a certain amount of control. It can't be a free-for-all. When you understand free market capitalism, in free market capitalism, there are 4 basic rights. The right to own private property. We talked about this toward the beginning. The right to own a business and keep all that business's profits, because according to Smith, you keep the profits, but the fact that you're running the business and paying people and providing a good service, that's going to benefit the entire economy. The right to freedom of competition, you're allowed to compete. And the right to freedom of choice, you're allowed to choose what you're going to do. Roosevelt, when he was president, when he was doing the New Deal and all that, he came up with 4 new ones. Freedom of speech and expression, because there was a time during the Industrial Revolution where laborers were oppressed about their speech and expression. They weren't allowed to stand up for themselves. Freedom to worship in your own way. No one should be telling you you can't, you have to worship a certain way to work there. Freedom from want and freedom from fear. All right. So we're not going to get real deep in those, but those were Roosevelt's. He added those to what the 4 basic rights of free market competition are, free market capitalism. Well, how do free markets work? Well, decisions about what and how much to produce are made by the market, not by the government. Consumers send signals about what they like and how they like it. So the market runs off of the desires of the consumers. The price tells companies how much a product they should produce. The consumers will let them know what price to charge, because basically the consumers won't buy something if you overcharge for it. And if you charge too little for it, they may think it's cheap and not buy it. So there's really a game there that you play. If something is wanted but hard to get, the price will rise until more products are available. This is supply and demand, which we're going to get into here in a couple of minutes. How are prices determined? Well, as buyers and sellers negotiate it in the marketplace. And he gives a great example there, that second to last bullet point. A seller may want to sell shirts for $50, but only a few people may buy at that price. Well, it depends on what kind of shirt. It depends on the quality level and that type of thing. If you want to sell, hey, if you're trying to sell t-shirts for $50, you're probably not going to make a whole lot of money. No one's going to pay $50 for a t-shirt. But if you're selling really high-end linen shirts, yeah, you could charge more than $50 actually. If the seller lowers the price, the quantity demanded will likely increase. And this is a key in the market. And there are tricks to that. And we're not going to get into it too much, but there are tricks to that. Because what happens if you lower the price too much? People think there's something wrong, right? They're, okay, what's wrong with this? Why is he charging it? Why is it so cheap? So you can actually damage your reputation by putting your price too low. I love this. I stuck this in. The author had this, and I thought this was really good. It's the circular flow model, the relationship between businesses and households. Households have buying power that supplies the businesses with capital. The businesses have input payments that basically they pay out wages, and that gives money to the households. The businesses provide goods and services to the households, and the households provide production through human resources to the businesses. So it's really a give and take circular kind of emotion with all this. And this is what makes our economy keep going in a capitalist free market economy. Supply and demand and equilibrium point are important to understand. We could really talk about these for a long time, but we're not going to. But supply is the quantity of products that manufacturers or owners are willing to sell at different prices. Demand is what the people are willing to buy at different prices. So supply is what they're willing to sell. Demand is what the people are willing to buy. The market price comes from the equilibrium point. The price is determined by supply and demand. And we're going to throw up another video real quick, and we're going to show how that works. Because it's just, for some of these concepts, it's just easier to watch a video than talk about it. And hold on a second. Back to share screen. Those are both still thing. All right. Let's rock and roll.
I'm Mr. Clifford, and
Yeah.
this is Adrian Hill, and welcome to Crash Course Economics. Let's start by talking about something that most people take for granted.
Is it grocery stores? Is it The Simpsons? Is it GPS? Is it goldfish? Is it frogs? Oh, it's probably these strawberries, right?
No, I was going to say markets.
But strawberries are great.
Yeah, but where do you think strawberries came from?
The ground, the farmer, the market, the grocery store, the miracle of life.
Now look around you. Where did all that stuff come from? And who made it? And why? Well, the answer is simple, but it's underrated. It's markets. And for most of us, farms and factories and stores, but mainly it's just markets. Can I have a strawberry now?
So a market is any place where buyers and sellers meet to exchange goods and services. The key to markets is the concept of voluntary exchange. That is, that buyers and sellers willingly decide to make a transaction. Let's say you go to a farmer's market and you buy a box of strawberries for $3. You valued the box of strawberries more than the $3 you gave up to get it. The seller valued the $3 more than the box of strawberries. The transaction's a win-win because you got your strawberries and the farmer got his money. You both felt better off. That's voluntary exchange. This same process happens in the labor market. Say that instead of the farmer's market, you bought your strawberries at your local supermarket. The cashier voluntarily decided to work there. He values the $10 an hour he makes there more than he does sitting at home watching The Walking Dead. At the same time, the owner of the store values the labor of the cashier more than the $10 an hour she pays him. And so it goes on and on, all the way up the chain of production, from the driver that delivered the strawberries to the farmer that grew the strawberries to the tractor that the farmer purchased. The point is that markets are everywhere, and most are based on voluntary exchange.
The part of all this that most people take for granted is how efficient the system is. Competitive markets turn out to be pretty great about allocating or distributing our scarce resources towards their most efficient use. So if farmers produce like too many strawberries, then the price will fall as sellers try to sell them off. Lower prices means less profit to strawberry farmers, and those farmers will have an incentive to produce something else, like lettuce or Brussels sprouts. So if farmers don't produce enough strawberries, buyers will bid up the price, and the farmers will have an incentive to produce more, which then drives down the price. And that's like magic, except it's not. The information that markets generate to guide a distribution of resources is what economists call price signals. Markets also incentivize the production of high-quality products. If the strawberries are brown and nasty, then no one's going to want to buy them. And if the tractor's a piece of junk, the strawberry farmer is going to tell other farmers to buy some other tractor. Now, ideally, the eventual result of voluntary exchange is that sellers can't make themselves better off without producing something that makes buyers better off. Businesses, in particular large corporations, are often villainized for being greedy, heartless institutions that take advantage of consumers. But if markets are transparent and buyers are free to choose, then businesses will have a hard time taking advantage of people. Now, obviously, greed and deception happen in real life, and there are situations when consumers don't have a choice. But for the most part, if you really don't like the policies or practices of a particular company, then don't shop there. After all, in the free market, every dollar that is spent signals to producers what should be produced and how it should be produced.
We've established that prices and profit determine where resources should go. But where do prices come from? Who determines the price of my box of strawberries? To answer that, we're going to draw, get ready for it, supply and demand. Let's go to the runway.
There's only one thing you should learn in economics, it's supply and demand. Let's use the market for strawberries to help us understand this concept. Up here on the y-axis, we have the price of strawberries. Down here on the x-axis, we have the quantity of boxes of strawberries. Let's start by looking at buyers and how they respond to a change in price. If the price goes up for strawberries, then some buyers will go buy blueberries or they'll go on that all-bacon diet. The point is, they're going to buy less strawberries. And if the price goes down for strawberries, then people are going to buy more. And this is called the law of demand. When the price goes up, people buy less. When the price goes down, people buy more. On the graph, it's shown by a downward sloping demand curve. Now let's think about sellers, like the farmer in the farmer's market. If the price of strawberries goes up, then that farmer will make more profit, so he'll have an incentive to produce more strawberries. If the price goes down, then he's not going to want to produce strawberries. That's called the law of supply. And on the graph, it's shown by an upward sloping supply curve. Now let's put demand and supply together. If the price is really high at $10, then producers would like to produce a lot of strawberries, but consumers won't want to buy them. This mismatch is called a surplus. And if the price goes down for strawberries, let's say down to $1, then buyers want to buy a whole lot, but producers won't have an incentive and they'll produce very little. Again, you have a mismatch, but this one's called a shortage. And there's only one price where the quantity that buyers want to buy is exactly equal to the quantity sellers want to sell. And it's right here where supply equals demand. The price is called the equilibrium price, and quantity is called the equilibrium quantity.
Okay, sure your graph makes sense, but the price of strawberries isn't always $3. Sometimes it goes up to $6. And at Whole Foods, local, artisanally grown strawberries, the fancy strawberries, can cost upwards of $12. But I guess Whole Foods is a whole other world where price has nothing to do with realistic economics. We'll stick to normal strawberries. In fact, the prices for all sorts of stuff change all the time. External forces can shift both the supply and demand curves, changing the equilibrium price and quantity. For example, let's assume that this graph shows the demand and supply of strawberries in the summer. What happens in the winter? Will the change in weather affect buyers' demand or producers' supply? Spoiler alert, it's supply. Colder temperatures make it harder to grow strawberries. The result is the entire supply curve is going to shift to the left. This is because at all possible prices, there would be fewer strawberries produced. That's it. This graph is just a tool that economists and everyone else use to show the results of a change in a market. I know it seems complicated at first, but there are really only 4 things that can happen in a market. Supply can decrease, supply can increase, demand can decrease, or demand can increase. Some people might want to talk about a price being fair or right. Well, that all depends on your point of view. The buyer always considers a low price to be a very fair price, while the seller considers it unfair, and vice versa. In general, economists don't really like to push opinions about prices. Voluntary exchange suggests that the price is there for a reason. For example, assume the demand for strawberries inexplicably falls, so the demand curve shifts to the left and the equilibrium price and quantity fall. Farmers might go to the government for assistance, but most economists would argue there is no reason to bail them out. The market's spoken. Strawberries are so over. Furthermore, if the government helps the farmers by giving them a subsidy, it would be putting resources towards something that society doesn't value. That would be inefficient. Luckily, every reasonable person on earth values strawberries, so they continue to get produced.
Now the downside is the supply and demand model only applies to analyzing strawberries. No, I'm just joking, it applies to all sorts of stuff. In fact, let's look at a market for a commodity known for its volatility, both because of its fluctuating prices and because sometimes it explodes. Gasoline. Now when you see gas prices, they're moving all over the board. That's just demand and supply. For example, in 2014, the retail gas prices in the United States fell dramatically. Why? Well, it was demand and supply. The economies of both Europe and China weakened, which decreased the demand for gasoline, shifting the demand curve to the left. At the same time, new fracking technology and restored production of oil in Iraq and Libya caused the supply of gasoline to increase or shift to the right. The combination drove gas prices down by more than 40% per gallon. And that's it. Now you can tell all your friends you understand supply and demand. It's a big day for you. It's a big day.
So markets and supply and demand are awesome. But sometimes they're not awesome. For example, we don't want to use the market approach when it comes to firefighters. 911, what's your emergency?
My house is on fire. How much do you charge to put it out?
It'll be $10,000. What's your credit card number?
They're all melted.
Okay, that one's obvious, but what about the market for human organs? After all, there's a huge shortage and thousands of people die each year waiting for transplants. Should there be a competitive market for human kidneys? A free marketeer would say, sure, why not? If a donor wants $15,000 more than he wants his other kidney, why stop him?
Well, ethics. I mean, there's several problems that arise with an unregulated market for human kidneys. First is the moral question. Is it fair for a poor person who can't afford a kidney to die while a rich person lives? Well, probably no, not at all. Another problem results from the law of supply. When there's an increase in the price of kidneys, there's an incentive for people to steal and sell kidneys. In fact, the World Health Organization has stated payment for organs is likely to take unfair advantage of the poorest and most vulnerable groups, undermines altruistic donations, and leads to profiteering and human trafficking. I mean, all bad things. Now, that being said, why do 70% of American Economic Association members support some kind of payment for organ donors?
Well, it's because you can solve some of these problems with the market approach, but the market must be regulated. Often, family and friends are willing to donate a kidney, but they're not a match for the patient. Economists generally support creating kidney exchanges, where pairs of willing donors are matched with strangers that agree to donate to each other's loved ones. In both cases, the supply of donated kidneys would increase, which would alleviate some of the shortage. Like we've said before, free markets are awesome, but they can't solve all our problems. Sometimes they need to be regulated, and sometimes they should be avoided. So there you have what for most people is the start, and for many, the end of economics. Supply and demand. Economists and politicians often like to refer to the interaction of supply and demand as laws, and we've done that too. But be clear, it's not an absolute law like the law of gravity.
Well, as we've tried to point out here on Crash Course, economics is about human choices and their consequences. Even though supply and demand behave in a predictable way that we've seen in the models, we can't lose sight of the fact that both of them are reliant on humans acting as buyers and sellers.
Our actions influence supply and demand in a way that they can't influence gravity, no matter how much we might want to.
Whoa.
That's After Effects. And that's something to keep in mind when you hear us or anybody talking about economic laws. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching Crash.
All right, guys. Well, they actually do a pretty good job of describing supply and demand. My monster's over here cuddling with me while we're talking, so that's kind of what he does. That's his whole thing. All right, let's get back into what we were talking about here, supply and demand. So they did a really good job in the video of going over the curves, which is one of the things I really liked about the video. That's why I chose it. So I talk about the supply curve. You know, you have your quantity here, your price here, and how it slopes up to the right. Your demand curve, your price over here, your quantity again, and it goes down to the left. So when you put them together, this point here, there's your equilibrium point right there. There's the point where pricing begins. Now, what businesses usually do is they'll price right up, they'll price right above that equilibrium point, right in this area right here, right up just above it. And that's where your profit margin is. And how far you can go up above that point becomes a big part of how you can price. So that's basically how supply and demand work. Any questions on that? All right, good. I thought the video was pretty, did a good job of explaining it with the whole strawberry thing anyway. All right, so let's get into free markets a little bit. Perfect competition. That means we have many sellers, but none is large enough to dominate or dictate what's going on with the price or the product. So we have this all over the place. We have this with, if you go in your grocery store, you know, how many companies make cereals and how many cereals do they make? How many companies make detergents and soaps and how many do they make? That's perfect competition. There's tons of them. Monopolistic competition is a little different. All right. That's when a large number of sellers produce very similar products, but buyers nevertheless perceive as different. All right. So you have a large number of sellers and their products are similar. You see this with soap, with Procter and Gamble, right? There's a bunch of companies, like some of these companies, we even produce soaps that will even compete against each other because they're just trying to grab more market share. That's monopolistic competition. An oligopoly is when you have a few sellers dominating a market. Gas stations are oligopoly. The airlines are, especially today's airline situation, they're hugely an oligopoly. There's a few companies that dominate the market. It causes the price to go up. Why? Because they kind of collude. They're not supposed to collude. It's illegal to collude. But you're going to tell me that the president of United, the president of American Airlines don't go and play golf every once in a while? Yeah, come on. Monopoly is totally different. Monopoly is when one seller controls all the product and all the service. Sometimes, and they set the price. Now there's no competition to control the price, so it can be a problem. This is why we try not to allow them in our free market society. However, sometimes, and I gave you examples earlier of like the water companies and utility companies, and sometimes you have to have a monopoly. It's just no choice. One of the things I never understood for years, and now the situation is finally changing, was companies like Comcast. They would Comcast. I'm sorry, somebody's coughing. Are we okay there?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, someone's coughing with your mic on. If I understand, just take a drink of water. Are you okay?
Yes, I'm fine. I'm sorry.
Okay, you may want to turn your mic off. Just make sure you're all right. But I never understood the situation with like a company like Comcast, right? Comcast goes into a community, they're the only cable provider, and there was no control. They were allowed to charge whatever they wanted. I hated them. I finally got rid of them. I love it. My wife and I have streaming now. We stream almost everything. We even stream our basic channels through YouTube. So I'm like, the happiest day of my life was when I dumped them. I probably saved myself $200 a month by doing it. I never understood that, but that's a example of an economy, of a monopoly. Benefits and limitations of free markets. Well, there are benefits. It allows for open competition amongst companies, which helps keep prices down. And it provides opportunities for poor people to work their way out of poverty. For people who are struggling, it gives them a chance to get a job. Now, we could talk about wages and stuff like that. We could have discussed that all day. But it gives them a chance to build out, theoretically. The limitations, it leads to inequality, as business owners and managers usually make more money and have more wealth than the lower level workers. This is why unions came into play in the mid 20th century, because workers were not getting paid well and they were working them to death. And a lot of other people were making good money. People may start to let greed drive them. Well, greed is the force in a free market capitalist system that you have to be conscious of, you have to be aware of, because greed is evil and people will become greedy. It happens. And we have to keep an eye on that. And it's one of the things that the government, when it's regulating, has to keep an eye on. So here's some test prep for you. The 4 basic rights people have under a free market. I'm not going to go over this when we have a few more minutes. But this is on the slide. The slides, of course, are always available to you. We can't go over it because then we're done. Okay. The 4 basic rights: the right to own private property, the right to own a business and keep all the business profits, the right to freedom of choice, and the right to freedom of competition. Those are the 4 basic rights under free market capitalism. How do business people know what to produce in the quantity? There's essentially what produce, and what quantity is decided by the market. It's decided by the relationship between the consumer and the business. That's how it works. How are prices determined? Pretty much the same way. Prices are determined by the economic concepts of supply and demand. Businesses control supply, consumers control demand. The two, I forget which way I went, but the two coming together, that is how you get your prices. And the 4 degrees of competition: perfect competition, monopolistic, oligopoly, and monopoly, which we already talked about. All right, that takes us up to 2 o'clock, guys. So class ends at 2:05. So if you get out a couple minutes early, I don't think that's a big deal. Socialism and communism and all that fun stuff is next week. Or not next week, it's on Thursday. Any questions before I sign out of here?
No.
Are we good?
Yep. Goodbye. Have a good day.
Goodbye. Have a good day.
Yeah,
All right, everyone else?
Have a good day.
Everyone take care. It was fun teaching you today. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Professor. Have a great day.
Bye.
You,
Thank you,
Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.